advocates for dignity and try and help people.
But Washington says Turkey failed to present any evidence. Mr. Khashoggi-style detention.
Attempt really to destroy democracy. I condemn this and I still condemn it.
And we'll move to the third topic, what is happening in Turkey, and to Dr. Bulent Kenes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayagos, and thanks to Advocates for Dignity for the invitation and giving me this opportunity to share my views and findings that I detailed in my book about what have been happening in Turkey for last few years through targeting and persecuting the members of the Gülen movement. We know the fact that the cruelty of man to his fellow man is not new. It is as old as the history of mankind. Mass killings, ethnic cleansings, massacres, and genocides continue to cause irrecoverable injuries to the collective conscience. Although there were some intellectual efforts to prevent massacres and genocides after the First World War, it was only in the 1990s that the international law against the crime of genocide produced some legal results. However, what is more important than the punishment of the crime of genocide is its prevention by early recognition. Experts working on genocides emphasize that some conceivable mechanism could be established on the subject. As one of the prominent experts, Gregory Stanton, describes the process that leads to genocide as predictable, and since it is predictable, it is also preventable. In my book, I have integrated the 10 stages of genocide, which was formulated by Stanton with late political scientist Hasan Kakar's studies, and then I applied this to widespread and systematic persecution aimed at members of the Gülen movement in Turkey. The clear picture reveals that all the crimes and acts contained in the academic descriptions and legal definition of the crime of genocide have already been carried out in different scales against the members of the Gülen movement by the Erdogan regime. As of today, millions of people have been victimized by the campaign of persecution conducted against the Gülen movement, which the Erdogan regime accelerated after the controversial coup attempt of July 15, 2016. More than 160,000 people have been dismissed from their civil service jobs and deprived of their and their families' subsistence. Tens of thousands of people in private sector have suffered a similar fate. Prevented from starting any kind of business or working elsewhere, they were sentenced to poverty and transformed into the civil death. Just because of their daily activities, which are non-criminal acts according to law and part of the very natural routine of life, more than 293,000 people were detained. Over 612,000 people have been subject to the investigations, and at least 97,000 people have been imprisoned. Dear friends, widespread and systematic torture has reemerged in Turkey. At least 200 died of circumstances or committed suicide because of psychological and physical circumstances, physical pressure, torture, and traumas that they experienced. At least 32 citizens of the Gülen were kidnapped in broad daylight. Some of them are still unknown. During this process, at least 200 media outlets have also been closed. Over 160 journalists and media workers are still in jails. Thousands of journalists have been left unemployed, and hundreds of them have been forced in exile. The widespread witch hunt, systematic hate speech, and ongoing persecution of Gülen movement members have made conditions in Turkey ripe for a systematic genocide. Therefore, this alarming situation requires the mobilization of international community, all institutions and powers that bear responsibility for the prevention of such a process before graver consequences are realized. In this regard, my book, A Genocide in the Making, may be kindly accepted as a timely or early warning. As is now, despite some serious limitations, the most comprehensive definition of genocide is found in Article 2 of UN Genocide Convention. According to this convention, the realization of just one of the 5 acts clearly described in the article is legally sufficient for the act to be defined as a crime of genocide. Genocide described as systematic acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group is in the process of full implementation in Turkey against the Gülen movement, which constitutes a sui generis religious social group with its distinguishing characteristics. Scholar Hasan Kakar argued that there are some preconditions for the possibility of implementation of genocide in a country. In the book, it was discussed in detail to what extent the historical, sociological, cultural, political, institutional, and conjunctural conditions in Turkey meet the 5 preconditions defined by Kakar. First, Turkey has national culture that doesn't place a high value on human life. Second, it has also a totalitarian society with its assumed superior ideology. Third, members of the dominant society must perceive their potential victims as less than human or non-human, as in China. Fourth, the despotic Erdogan regime has a strong centralized authority and bureaucratic organization. Fifth, Erdogan's regime, as a perpetrator for a possible genocide, has recruited hosts of pathological individual and criminals and mafia people. If we elaborate on Erdogan regime's systematic persecution of members of the Gülen movement, we can easily assert that at least 2 of the 5 acts described in Article 2 of the UN Genocide Convention as the crime of genocide have been realized completely, and 3 of them have been realized to various extents. Namely, the crime of causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, as is mentioned in Article 2 of the Convention, has been committed completely. The crime of deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part has been committed completely. The crime of killing members of the group has been committed partially. The crime of imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group has been committed partially. And the crime of forcibly transferring children of the group to another group has been committed partially. On the other hand, the book's findings reveal that this process of genocide has completed the stages of classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, and persecution, as detailed by Gregory Stanton. It has also been observed that the stage of extermination and denial have already begun on a certain scale. However, as the most destructive dimension of genocide, the physical extermination or annihilation has not yet been implemented systematically, but the extermination is just a matter of time. As genocide experts like Stanton have underlined that genocide should be preventable if they are predictable, some scholars underline that hate speech and incitement together increase risk for genocide, especially when they come from the top down in authoritarian regimes. They also advise that when political leaders use explicit pseudo-medical and epidemiologic metaphors, such as microbes, field, cancer, typhoid, and rats to dehumanize victim groups, it is prudent to regard such language as an urgent warning sign of imminent genocide. In the case of the Erdogan regime and Gülen movement, this stage has long been past. Erdogan has used hundreds of hate expressions, including viruses, cancers, tumors, vampires, leeches, bloodsuckers, bacteria, and microbes. However, since the systematic physical extermination process through killings has not begun, it is not yet too late. As a conclusion, a possible genocide openly targeting members of the Gülen movement is not only predictable, but that can also easily be seen with its concrete signs and thus should be preventable. So it is so vital that all international humanitarian institutions and political organizations to act without delay to develop measures to prevent a possible genocide. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Kennis. That was a very persuasive discussion of both acts of genocide and the process that is leading the 10 stages that lead to genocide.
First of all, you are right. when people are start to thinking about a situation, the terminology is important. So I have an hesitation when I started to write the book about the terminology, whether I should use the terminology of crime against humanity or the genocide. But the crime against humanity just show a situation already available. But crime against humanity also a face towards a possible or probable future atrocities in the volume of genocide. When I look at the situation in Turkey, I think the genocide terminology and frame and definition could be used in the situation. So I just I didn't make much comment or interpretation about the situation, but just apply well accepted schablon or well accepted frame to what happened in Turkey. So the picture emerged about the process of genocide. We discussed some of the genocide and human rights experts in Sweden also, especially some scholars in Uppsala Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Some scholars, we discussed this issue, whether we should use the terminology of the crime against humanity or the genocide. They discussed and they said that yes, you don't say this is the genocide. This is the process of genocide, and as a tool, you want to warn the people that a process is going on, and this could result in a kind of mass destruction in a volume of genocide. So it is not problem to use this terminology to warn and alert international community and those who have responsibility to prevent this process. It is okay. So I prefer to use the terminology of the genocide. But as I said, the current situation in Turkey couldn't be defined as genocide. On the other hand, you said that the United Nations Genocide Conventions defines what is the genocide and what are the victims. We don't say that Gülen movement is a specific or sui generis social religious group with distinguishing characteristics. The Erdogan regime label Gülen movement and the sympathizers of the Gülen movement as a distinct and different social religious entity. So, in the eyes of the perpetrators, the Gülen movement is a religious social group enemy to the other part of the society and should be destroyed. So, in that term, it also meets the definitions of UN Convention, I think. Otherwise, as I mentioned in my presentation, the UN Genocide Convention has limitations. I think it should be reformed and will be much more inclusive and comprehensive. The genocide terminology determined just after the post-World War, after the Holocaust. So it defines the Holocaust, but not the general terminology needed to define genocide. So in that terms, I think it is so suitable, so I think usable to use genocide terminology to define what is happening in Turkey.
Okay, thank you very much. What I like about the idea is that indeed, based on the 2007 ruling of the International Court of Justice, you shouldn't be alerting the world to an ongoing genocide, but you should alerting the world to an impending genocide so that the prevention of genocide can kick in, and indeed a risk of genocide is enough to invoke the Genocide Convention, and sadly